Hi witches, I'm here today to talk about learning to love your body as witch. This is going to be a two-part series, and this one is more about why and sort of what questions can we ask. The next video is going to be about the ways that you could approach learning to love it, the ways that I have found helpful and that my friends have found helpful. So often the mind, soul and spirit, which are focused on in the modern craft a lot, are kind of given centre stage really in videos, in books, a lot of media, but we don't often talk about our body, even though it's the way we can express and experience all the life we live in. It's our bodies that can do the physical actions which we require for magic. We talk often about getting to know things like crystals, carrying them with us, getting to know plants and other beings, but we don't talk about getting to know ourselves in physical form. And of course, if we don't get to know ourselves in physical form, we cannot truly love ourselves because we can't love something we don't know. Say we carry around a rose quartz for a day and we feel strong urges to nurture those around us. We can't measure that against anything without first having some clue as to our own cycles first. Perhaps the moon's in Libra and it's June, and you always feel loving and nurturing in the summer. And in this moon phase, sorry, I've got a really croaky throat at the moment, a bit of a cold, so apologies for that. If we get to know ourselves and our own cycles and record what we discover, recording stuff is so important, and yeah, it can be a bit of a ball's ache, but at the end of the day, witchcraft it's not just some fun hobby that you pick up and you put down. It's a way of life. It really is studies, isn't it? Several different studies, a whole wide variety of different things that you study. And unfortunately, that means that there's work, like anything that you study. So getting to know yourself, really, you have to record these things to deeply know yourself, just as scientists who have got to know themselves from a scientific point of view, they've had to record things. Same as, if you're studying something outside of yourself, you have to record what happens on a daily basis, really, in order to have some comparison, some beginning point. If we get to know ourselves and our own cycles and record this, even in a sentence each day, we can measure the effects of the things that we interact with so much better, because we already have that base point that we're working from. And this video isn't to say that no one else is doing it, but more that, in my opinion, I think more conversation on it is important, and some guidance on it is really important. I certainly needed guidance, and I've had lots of epiphanies to get to where I am, and I still have a really long way to go. But I think starting that conversation is a truly important thing, and I don't believe that without sharing, it makes it so much more difficult and also so much more isolating when essentially the body is something that everybody experiences, even though we all experience it so differently. It is something that everybody experiences, and a lot of people experience the same effects or things that happen. So, for example, a large majority of people experience menstruation. A large majority of people experience wet dreams. A large majority of people experience getting a cold, or how it feels when you sleep during the daytime. All of those kinds of things, that's all a bodily experience, and we can all share and learn from those. I think it's so important, because it's not talked about enough. And our modern day life cuts us off from the wonders of the body so often, even making us despise them, when really it's the most beautiful thing that we have. We're told that a certain size is beautiful, and that with that size comes accomplishments and happiness and love. And that's not true. We're taught menstruation is disgusting and it's only okay to have hushed conversations in the corner with friends about it. That's not true. We're taught that, you know, when we give birth, we need all of these checks constantly. We need to have someone's hand shoved up our, doodah, in order to make sure that everything's fine. And I just don't run with that. We're taught from film and images that sex is about clean white bed sheets and two unsweaty, perfectly toned people making love with no mess or weird sounds. And I think everybody that's had sex knows that that's not the case. We also all sit, or not all of us, a big majority of, I suppose, the Western world really, but it's becoming a much more international, huge problem. Sit for hours and hours a day on trains, at desks, at computers, at tables, on sofas, in front of the telly, in front of our laptops, in front of our iPads, and we all see this as normal. And of course it's not, and it's not normal for our bodies. It's not the way that they expect to live, and so they don't really know how to deal with it. We eat and we drink, and we don't consider even what it's for at all. Often people only think about taste. Luckily, the discussion of healthy eating is coming back in, but only because such a severe and horrific problem has been caused with the obesity crisis and with the huge number of eating disorders that there are. And so equally, either we don't consider it, or we think only of the things that eating and drinking can cause, and this becomes obsession, but we don't think about what it's for. We don't think about what the individual bits of food are doing for our own body, and also what our own body responds best to. For example, I'm a vegetarian, but obviously my body wasn't built to be vegetarian. So you have to do that kind of thing in a considerate manner, and also realize that sticking to your morals might mean that you never reach the peak of health that you could have, because essentially you're not getting some things that your body expects. And that's okay, so long as we can admit that, that's fine. But yeah, I've got to say, I don't agree with bringing a child up vegetarian, particularly. I certainly don't agree with feeding animals vegetarian food. That's a big no for me. Something that really riles me, but yes, off topic, sorry. So we also lie in bed unable to sleep at night. I have a terrible time sleeping, and I always have done. And it's got to be partly down to, I think it's more to do with the chemicals within my body rather than the complete lifestyle. 'Cause even making a lot of lifestyle changes, I still lie awake at night. But then also, I've had an eating disorder for a long time, which I'm only now overcoming. So that also really affects sleep, and that's to do with the body. That's to do with the body taking in food, what the body expects, and the body not getting what it expects. And so it's waking you up because it's telling you to go and eat. So our bodies weren't built for modern life, essentially. They haven't evolved yet, and in a lot of ways I hope they don't, because that's not what they're supposed to do. And so much of our innate power does not lie in sitting around, and doesn't lie in the lifestyles we lead with modern life. And we can't find that innate power if the body is forgotten or put to one side and you know, expected to just get on. And it's so easy to forget to get to know our own bodies, and to do what we can to really get that power out of them. It's so easy to forget, not just in everyday life and our busyness and stuff, but also as a witch in the excitement of learning things outside of your body. You know, you want to dive into getting to know plant spirits, and how does this plant make you feel, and how does that plant make you feel, and you want to carry around crystals, and you want to plunge yourself into baths filled with essential oils and flowers and herbs. But you kind of forget that actually, if you don't have that baseline of knowing yourself, the other things you're never going to be able to measure fully. Your experience of them, yeah, really, because you just don't have that baseline. And it can be so exciting when you have that baseline to see, oh, that's why sometimes when I burn rosemary, I feel this way, and other times it makes me feel this way. You know, it can be such a brilliant, exciting experience. If we get to know our body, it can point us to our own strengths, ones we might never have considered, and it can also help us overcome our weaknesses. So one of the most talked about cycles of the body is menstruation. But if we're female, do we as a witch know our own? Do our own cycles relate to the moon? And there are so many other cycles to consider. You might find your body responds more to the sun, and you've never considered it within magical workings. Excuse me. Oh, coffee. You might think, for example, overcoming weaknesses, you might think you're awful at trance work, only to realise that when you dance, you naturally go into a mild trance, and so using movement, you're hugely successful at falling into it. But previous to that, you know, you only tried it lying down or sitting down. You might find that you feel a powerful need to move at the end of March, and so raising energy through stamping works best for you then, whereas there's a need to express and build energy within the throat in early May, and so humming works better for you then. Another question to consider would be, are our emotions influenced by the amount of daylight, which is a pretty common question. There are lots of studies showing it, that people know about seasonal affective disorder, known as SAD. Yeah, so it's a common question, and it links back to hormones again. Of course, these hormones are everybody's hormones rather than simply the feminine hormone system. And they're something that the body itself produces and regulates. Do we notice a change in our physical energy levels depending on which house the moon is in or which season we're experiencing? Do we heal faster or stay healthier in winter when we always thought it was spring? And how does this affect our magic? If we practice healing, do we then realise we heal others better in winter? There's so much we've fallen out of in modern day. The scents our body produces, for example, smell can tell you so much about the body, about health, emotion. I'm not saying you have to refuse deodorant and never remove your coat because you're going to double sweaty from the train. That'd be a bit far, I think. But smell is important, and it's well known diabetes has a certain smell, as does dehydration. Smell is another way, a big and primitive, deep animalistic way of our body communicating with ourselves and other people. My son, he was born with a kidney problem, and he used to get kidney infections all the time, and I knew he just smelled different. Every mum smells their baby's head, and he smelled different when he had this kidney infection. The urine often always pretty much smells different, but he himself had a different smell. Lots of people will cringe at the thought of learning the sense of the body, of learning to navigate them, of learning their language. But as a witch, we know that scents can bewitch. We perhaps know musk, a scent worn to appeal to men, was taken from the male musk deer. Many believe that the males use it to attract the females within musk deer. But it's women who often wear musk to seem alluring, really, or to seduce someone, or, you know, it's seen as a sexy perfume. What am I trying to say here? So, yeah, so with, you know, it's swapped round for humans, and, you know, could that mean that perhaps it mimics a scent produced by human females, even though it's used in the opposite way in musk deer? Could it be that it's mimicking a scent produced by human females? We're not going to know that unless we get to know the scents. And it may sound odd to talk about, but if we learn the smells of the body, the natural scent that tells humans and other animals how we feel or how well we are, then we can learn how to use those by, you know, learning to imitate them, or using the base smell to influence emotion, and not just love, not just seduction, but calm, ecstasy, happiness, motivation. All emotions will have a smell. We can learn from our own body how to approach and use what we find in the outside world, rather than only learning the other way around. Another question would be, how do we move? What are our limits, our capabilities? As someone with a disability, well, a few disabilities, including nerve damage to my right leg, hands and feet, I'm relearning all of it. Not just how far I can push myself, but also, can I use myself in a different way to before? What's more successful now? Can I still feel magical energy in the parts of me that don't feel physical touch, except in a odd, painful way? It's difficult to explain, but when you've got nerve damage, sometimes something gently pressing on the skin can feel like you've torn your foot open. It's an incredibly odd feeling, and it's fascinating to me to learn, can I still feel magical energy in those areas of my body? I've definitely learned limits. I've learned how damaging it is to perform magic or try and do trance work when energy and conserves are low. I learned that the hard way. It was an important lesson. You can't put your soul and spirit through ordeals like that when your body's pushed too hard in an ordeal of its own. Now, you will have heard the phrase, dance like no one is watching. But do you know how you dance when no one is watching? What's your dance like? Because dance can be a key to magical expression as well. I dance through energy, weaving magical threads around. I push, pull, build up energy. I evoke and invoke emotion in myself when I dance. It's taught me more about the elements that I connect with, when before I just, there was something I couldn't quite get. And now that particular thing has had a really big impact on my spell work. And I don't mean elements as in the, I don't know what they're called in Wicca. What is it? The watchtowers or something, is it? So I don't mean in that sense, but I mean the actual elements, you know, that we are created of, the elements within us and the elements, you know, what is it? The air, my breath, water, my blood, earth, my body, fire, my spirit, something. Yeah. That chant, for example, like that kind of learning the elements rather than 4 points in a circle. And that has had a huge impact on my spell work. It's also taught me more about the movement of energy itself. It's also worth asking yourself, you know, you can use your normal life. When you sit still, how do you feel? What impact does it have on your body? Do your feet get cold very quickly? Do you get stiff? All of these things are, yeah, good questions. Have you sat in the dark still to awaken visions? If not, it's something I recommend. All stimuli away, and potentially, if you can, wrap yourself up, and then you lie very still, and that can awaken visions. Have you awakened and lain in the darkness recounting a nightmare? We start to see through those things how our physical actions awaken our minds and can be used for magical experiences, like the witch's cradle, which the witches of medieval times, it was supposed to be some sort of torture technique, but they took it and realised that they could awaken visions and seeing themselves. Hang on, my son and husband have just got in. So there's also touch to consider. I've found that I can calm my body and help lessen its pain through touch. Interestingly, there's actually a point, it's here, about, where is it, about there, and if you press it really hard, until it's sort of uncomfortable, it'll be there, then you can get, or at least lessen the cramps you get with your period. And also, obviously, if you've got tummy cramps for any other reason, that can be a really helpful thing to know. As a witch, we can learn how touch affects the body. For a spell, for example, do we massage oil into someone to create an effect? Do we press our thumb onto their forehead? Do we pour water over their head? There's sex magic, of course, and lots of info out there on that. I won't talk about it because, well, not now. It's not something I'm particularly interested in. It just doesn't excite me that much. So, I think a lot of it is from quite a male point of view as well, because, you know, you've got the whole Aleister Crowley thing, and yeah, just not something that floats my boat that much. But obviously, if it floats yours, that's fantastic, and there's so much out there on it. You may as well look. And yeah, the other people have some really good resources for that. I will point out, though, that sex magic doesn't have to be orgies, it doesn't have to be sleeping around, it doesn't have to be rampant or sadomasochistic. These are all things that are often associated with it, but it doesn't have to be those things at all. It can be two married or long-term partners working together. It could be you yourself alone achieving orgasm. Often orgasm is seen as very important in it. And of course you've got the relation of orgasm to death. You know, the French call it le petit mort, the little death. And of course, yeah, so death could be seen as an ecstatic state in some ways and cultures, just the same as orgasm is. Anyway, moving on from that, because that's a whole other thing. What about temperature? How does that affect your body? If we use that water in a spell, pouring it over someone's head, will it be warm? Will it be cold? How does it feel to have cold water for you poured across you? Or how does it feel to be immersed in something unbearably hot? What about lukewarm? The effects of sort of sweat lodges and saunas and you know, the hot baths that you're recommended when you're cleansing with Epsom salts and so on in, those kind of things, they have a reaction on the body, not simply to get it to sweat and release toxins, but also to relax muscles and so on. And it's very interesting to note how it affects your own personal body. I have known people who, on contact with high levels of heat, whether or not it's on or around their head, they get a big headache, for example. That could be something that you record. There's also taste and sight, and we taste almost all the time. Taste is very powerful, and as everybody really knows, some tastes are addictive. Unfortunately, those tend to be the ones most unhealthy for us. Although there is a link, interestingly, between carbohydrate and low serotonin levels or depression. So essentially, carbohydrate can increase serotonin levels, therefore making you feel less depressed. And there have been studies into it relating to things like bulimia and why bulimics tend to crave carbohydrate. And I think those kind of studies, a lot, you know, it needs to be done much more often. We need to look into how different foods, different food groups, different individual foods affect our body. Because we've forgotten, we've lost it. You know, there are, within herbal medicine, we see that food can be medicine. And it's so important when we've lost that. You know, animals will eat things. They know the properties of things, and how it affects their body. They know that by eating certain things, they don't, for example, get parasites like worms, because it's a worming tablet, so it's, you know, the worms are flushed out of them. And this is wild animals, so yeah, it's an important thing to learn how food affects our body. In the myths of the fair folk, we hear time and time again we mustn't eat their food, for once we do, we are banned there. Of course, I work with fair folk within my magic, so that's kind of why I would know about this, but it's a very well-known thing within fairy tales and things, that you don't eat the food in the lands of fair folk, because once you do, you're bound there. And in many instances, it's said that the food is so good you can't eat any other, so you pine after it, and therefore you must stay in fairyland or die. And if you're not allowed in fairyland, some people have pined away for that food. There's also the poisoned apple in myth and fairy tale, which importantly looks delicious and looks appealing. And glamour by the fair folk often works with things appearing in human sight to be something they're not. But if we learn more about how to look, then perhaps we may see through this glamour. You know, we learn about our physical and spiritual ways of looking, and we learn how those intermingle, and therefore, you know, we can see through glamour magic. Scrying, of course, is using our sight. We can learn how to unfocus our own sight or focus on a single point to allow ourselves to see images around it. This can be part of learning our bodies when we're tired. For example, do we have less success because our eyes are drier? And that would mean that you might, if you're tired, you can then, if you've realised that, get eye drops or an eye bath before you do it. You can even make it a ritual, you know, have a ritual eye bath or ritual eye drops that you use, although don't use belladonna. It makes you blind. So it was popular. No, not anymore. And for those of us who wear contact lenses, does this impact on scrying on you? The most important thing to take away from this whole video is love your body, your own wonderful body that carries your soul and gives you human life. It breathes and it eats and it moves for you. You are your body and it is you. You may have been through hell. Your mind, like mine, may have caused you to abuse your body. But as a witch, it's so important to know it and to love it deeply. And one of the things that has always stuck in my mind is Sarah Ann Lawless in her blog saying, she's talking about journeying. And she says, you must love your body and want to come back to it when you journey. You must want to come back to it when your journey's finished. And that's always stuck with me. And I think it is so very important. As a witch, you know, your body is you. Your body is witch, just as you are. And it's important that you learn to love it here and now, to learn to love it like never before, to tear off the binds that modern lives and society wrap around it, to free it and give it liberty as witch. As I've said, my next video will be about the things I and my friends have found helpful in learning to love our bodies. But I really hope that this video has maybe just tickled something in you to get to know your own body that much more. blessings and love, which is